Alright. Hopefully my audio will not cut out this time. Uh, there was 10 documents filed today. Well, actually 12. I already did the first two. It spans from 269 to 279, which includes Exhibit 1 through like 15. I'm going to go through each one. I was planning on reading the whole document in one piece, but this is going to take forever. See, now it's 439 pages, and I'm just going to break this into parts. Exhibit 1 was the Manitowoc Sheriff's Department, Dennis Vogel and Cook Zurich versus Stephen Avery's civil suit. Exhibit 2 is the deposition of Andrew Colborn, which took place on July 21st, 2022, from 9:23 to 5:22 p.m. And here, let's dive in. Times Reporter, which is a newspaper, Kearney, Wisconsin, correct? Yes, it is. And the date in the upper left-hand corner, this January 31st, 2007. Do you see that? Sorry, no, I don't. Where is that? Indicating, oh, yes. Do you read the Herald Times Reporter? I have a subscription. I don't have a subscription. I couldn't look at it online. Do you agree with that you were reading the Herald Times Reporter back in 2007? Yes, I'm sure there were days in 2007 that I read the paper. Yes. Do you have any specific recollection of reading this article? I do not. I'll read the headline of the top article to you. Defense allowed to point finger at deputies. Do you have any quibble with the accuracy of this headline? Mr. Burnett, objection. Foundation, I have objection with everything. The media. Mr. Colborn, do you get an objection today? You only get to answer questions. Your attorney gets to object. My question is, do you dispute the accuracy of this headline? I know you dispute that you planted evidence in the defense theory, if we can call it that, but do you dispute the accuracy of the headline that the, quote, defense was allowed to point finger at deputies? Do you dispute that? I'm sorry, Ms. Walker. I thought your question was do I object to the headline? No. Do you dispute the accuracy that this was the defense was allowed to do? Mr. Burnett, objection. Foundation, no, I don't dispute the headline. And there's a subheadline, judge, attorneys allowed to prove a refrain. You don't dispute the accuracy of the headline, do you? Mr. Burnett, objection. Foundation, answer. I'm not sure what you mean by accuracy of the headline. Certainly what's printed here in front of me. I don't recall a specific article, but I'm not going to dispute that there's written in front of me. I'm asking you a little bit more than that. I'm asking whether you dispute the accuracy of the contents, the substance of what's being said here. I can ask it differently. Isn't it true that the judge allowed the attorneys to prove that Avery was framed? Objection. Again, he attended portions of the trial and was cross-examined on this very topic. I think he can answer the question. Mr. Burnett, I didn't tell him not to answer the question. I objected to the foundation. I don't think you've established personal knowledge, but go ahead. Yes, it's my understanding that the judge allowed that. So, Mr. Colborn, let me ask you just one more time, if you'll go back to the proposed stipulations 7, 8, and 9, are you still going to refuse to admit those? And I'll let you read them if you need to. Yes, I'm not going to stipulate to those. All right, let's take a look at Exhibit 7, which we'll hand you in just a moment. Schuler, correct? Correct. And the email that Brenda sent you was an email she sent to someone named John Farrack. Mr. Farrack is a reference to the stipulations that you did agree to. He's a former journalist, correct? I'm not 100% positive, but I believe he still is a journalist. I believe he's the editor of the Patch newspaper in Joliet, Illinois. And she's writing to Mr. Farrack in your defense, and I will point you down in her email maybe 8 lines where she says, there is nothing new in Making a Murderer other than an incredibly slanted and selectively edited reading splicing of actual testimony days apart into one. Version based on the defense's view. Do you see where I'm reading? Yes, yes. And you read that correctly, correct? Yes, you did. And you forwarded this to your wife at the time, correct? Yes. And that's because you agreed with Miss Schuler, correct? I pertain to Miss Farrick, and yes, I did. Right. And you agreed that there was nothing new in Making a Murderer, and it was a slanted version based on defense view, correct? I didn't include any comments on that. That's why it wasn't mine. I forwarded this to my ex-wife. That's not my question. You forwarded it because you agreed with what Miss Schuler wrote here, correct? I forwarded it because my ex-wife was concerned about all the negative press we were receiving from Mr. Farrick, who was a local reporter in Wisconsin at the time. Okay, you can say no, and you can ask a new question. Well, I'll ask it this way. Do you disagree with Miss Schuler and what she said here? I don't agree with Miss Schuler's opinion, no. Let's take a look at the proposed stipulation number 15, if you could go back to Exhibit 1. Okay, I read out loud to you. We asked you to agree with even prior to the release. Mr. Colborn understood that Making a Murder would not portray. I'll draw the objection. You can answer. I disagree with that statement. On what basis? Let me ask you. You have not watched the whole thing, correct? In fact, you haven't even watched the last 3 episodes, all according to stipulated facts, correct? This is correct, yes. So you have no idea in those last 3 episodes whether it tells both sides of the stories, raises questions, or encourages viewers to reach their own conclusion. You just don't know, correct? I don't know any of the content of the last 3 episodes, that's correct. Can you point to me where in Making a Murder it contends that you planted evidence to frame Avery for Teresa Halbach's murder? I believe there's quite a few examples in the complaint that were, so I'm not an attorney. I know. I hired attorneys to do the research to find that evidence. I'm asking you, yeah, and you're Stephen Avery? I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I'm sorry. So I'll represent to you in the 3 episodes you didn't watch. Yes. The reading of the verdict is shown. Okay. And Stephen Avery has walked out of the courtroom in handcuffs to jail. That detracts from the strong, definite statement that you planted evidence to frame him, correct? I don't know. Without watching it, I don't know. I don't know how and what context it was shown, so I don't know. Do you have any intention of watching Making a Murder in its entirety? No. Okay. I don't. Despite litigating a federal lawsuit that may go to trial, you don't plan to watch a documentary that you're being sued over? It's ruined my life. I'm not going to pay to watch it. It's ruined my life. Dude, everybody has Netflix. What do you mean you're not going to pay to watch it? I guarantee you already have Netflix. You had to have, if you watched portions of the documentary, you must have had it at one time. Well, that's not my question, and I'll move such thing. But majority assumed he was guilty. Why would the police have arrested him if he wasn't involved? I think I skipped over a sentence about Nancy Grace, but otherwise, did I read that correctly? Answer, yes. And do you agree with the assessment of the local reaction of the murder of Teresa Halbach and the arrest of Stephen Avery? I'll agree that there were some in the community that thought he was innocent. Some thought he had done this again. I don't know if the majority was one way or the other, and that's Mike's opinion. What does he mean by some thoughts had done this again? Did what again? Understood. So I'll now hand you Exhibit 15B, which is also from The Innocent Killer. There's a few pages later in the book, pages 215, in the 3rd paragraph down, Mr. Griesbach wrote, the Avery case was naturally the chief topic of discussion at Warren's from the date of Teresa Halbach's appearance, I think they made disappearance, until the end of trial. From the window washer to the county executive, everyone at Warren's had an opinion about the case, and given that what I do for a living, they, quote, would agree with Miss Hainsman's assessment, correct? Miss, I believe And that might be her interpretation of it. But yes, certainly Avery had his supporters and not quite or anywhere near as vocally. Law enforcement probably had a few supporters as well. So I want to turn again to Exhibit 1 and those stipulations that were proposed. Okay. And specifically number 11, 13, and 14. I'll read them out loud. Number 11 says Mr. Colborn felt wronged by the frame-up theory put forth by the defense in Mr. Avery's trial. Number 13 says Mr. Colborn felt that the frame-up theory put forth by the defense in Mr. Avery's trial harmed his reputation. And hang on a second. Okay, so you're reading 11, 12, and 13 because mine says 13 blank. Yes, answer, and 11. If you could flip the ones proposed, okay, yes. She told us that she felt like the system turned on you by letting the evidence planting theory be introduced at trial. Do you agree with that? Again, I don't ever recall telling her that the system turned on me. I probably told her I didn't feel that the officers involved in the investigation were getting the backing that they probably needed from the county. Go ahead. She told us that we were afraid you were going to be sent to prison. Do you agree with that? No. She said that you were not yourself during the trial. Do you agree with that? Yes. She said that you were quiet and could only focus on the trial. Do you agree with that? Yes. She said you would pace in the house. Do you agree with that? Yes. She said you were withdrawn. Do you agree with that? Well, I've been withdrawn all my life, so certainly, yes, I agree with that. She said you started drinking more during that trial. Do you agree with that? Well, I'm not going to sit here and say I crawled into a bottle, but I didn't. But certainly, yes, I probably used that as some sort of way to de-stress after work. She said you stopped going out in public. Do you agree with that? Yes. She said you started avoiding people. Do you agree with that? That would be more after the release of Making a Murderer, not during the trial. She said that you started feeling like you couldn't trust anyone during the trial. Do you agree with that? No. So I'll ask you to look one more time at those proposed stipulations, number 11. Okay? 13 and 14, and my 11, 13, 14. And my question is, will you agree to them? This is how you felt at the time of the trial. There were times that I was angry, yes, and it was because your integrity was questioned. It was. Among other things, yes. And you felt like no one was coming to your defense. Well, I'm speaking specifically about the media, yes. No, I didn't feel any member or news organization was coming out of the defense, no. And you felt like your reputation was taking a hit, correct? Certainly. So now go to page 23 of the same document, of the same exhibit. Okay, all right, I have it. The second full paragraph, minute marker 114:15. Do you see that? The one that states, so Mr. Ferrick, yes, and it says Mr. Ferrick on occasion had written an article and it prompted a lot of death threats. Did I read that correctly? Yes. Do you remember making a statement to the filmmakers convicting a murder? I don't. I told you earlier I don't specifically recall, but you don't. There we go. There it is. I was waiting for it. I don't recall. Didn't realize we'd be this many pages in before I heard it, but you told me this is an exact excerpt from Brenda Schuler's or whoever interviewed me. This is the exact expert of what I said. Right. No reason to dispute that you said it, correct? I'm not disputing that I said it. And that's a true statement in your mind, correct? Yes. That he wrote an article and it prompted a lot of death threats? Yes. Will you go back to Exhibit 1 and look at your proposed stipulation number 25? Yeah. You have to go back here. No, I have to read, though, this whole thing because the article may have been about another case that had nothing to do with Stephen Avery. Mr. Ferrick was also going after our department. I believe they're referencing to the Ricky Hostetler case. Yeah, the Sheriff's Department instructed me to do it, and you know what the statement was recorded and included in episode 8 of Making a Murderer? Well, having not watched episode 8, no, I don't know the statement was made, and so I wouldn't know what context or anything. I'll read the statement to you. You told the press, I hope and pray that this verdict helps put to rest any suspicions or loss of confidence that this community may have felt towards our department, because I assure everyone that this agency has some of the finest corrupt law enforcement officers in the country in its employ. I know you don't remember it word for word, but does that sound like what you said? I certainly would have stood up for the department, yes, and I still pray for the Hallbach family, so that sounds consistent. Does it make you feel better to know that it was included in episode 8? Objection. I would have to watch episode 8 and see in what context how it was used. Like, was it used to ridicule me? So then no. I wouldn't feel better about how it was used. But you don't plan to watch episode 8? Correct. As I sit here right now today and talk with you, no. I don't plan on watching episode 8, but certainly there is no reason I can't change my mind at some point. Okay, Miss Walker, let's go to Exhibit 37. Exhibit 37 is marked for identification. Do I have that one or no? I'm going to give it to you. Okay. Miss Walker, sure. So Exhibit 37 collectively is Mr. Colborn's response to interrogatories in this case. I've marked the different responses, supplement responses, signature pages, Exhibit 37A, B, C, and D. It's a little confusing given the way things kind of came in. But let's start with Exhibit 37A, which is Mr. Colborn's. I'll represent to you are the first. Lauren, last name McCracken. Okay. Next oldest child's first name is Brandy. Anyone else? Yes, next child is going to oldest, youngest, Amanda and Jeremiah. And they're also adults, correct? Yes, Jeremiah is youngest and he's 30. You also did not list a woman named Jody Maurer. I understand you are in a relationship with her, correct? Yes, and she's a witness to your alleged emotional distress in this case? Nope, not really, because we don't discuss it. Okay, do you live with her? So you're telling me that you're emotionally distressed and this has caused so much hurt and problems in your life that you don't talk to anybody about it, especially your significant other? Yeah, I don't buy it. Do you live with her? Yes, and you live with the lady too. She's definitely going to sense something's wrong with you. And I know women, they're not going to just ignore it. Am I right, y'all? Okay. It's not been in a position to observe physical manifestations of distress. Now, really, no. Do you have any physical manifestations of distress, such as loss of weight, physical manifestations, anxiety, inability to sleep, depression? Not depression. I do have, inability to sleep. I'm constantly in a state of hypervigilance. I'm very distrustful of people now, and I'm extremely introverted, much more so than I was before. Do you think Miss Morrow has been able to observe these? No. Not in a position to observe it. No. It's not observable. Is that what you're telling me? Right. She's never said, like, why do you do this? Or why do you do that? She just assumes that the way I am. And you're making an assumption on her assumption about an assumption. Okay, and you haven't had any conversations with her about this case? I have not. How long have you lived with her? We started sharing residence in April of 2021, so more than a year. This case has never came up. No. I mean, I told her today I'm going to, I told her when court dates are, and she's asked me once if the lawsuit was still ongoing. So you answer no, and then anything happened I said was expressing concern or drug into it, things like that. So you did not list her and your children because you didn't want to drag them into it, or is it because she really doesn't know anything about the lawsuit or the underlying facts? She doesn't, yeah. She doesn't know anything about it because I won't discuss it. And she doesn't pry about it. I think she senses it one of those topics that should be avoided. An assumption, because if you don't talk about it, and your alleged emotional distress wouldn't be observable by a person living in the same house as you. I don't believe so. No. Like I have taken anything today. Yeah, do you have? I have acid reflux, so I took an antacid. Uh-huh. I have asthma, so I took an inhaler every morning. I am on medication for anxiety. I can't give you the name of it because I'm trying to withhold it because I don't know, but you have my records. I believe I took one of those this morning. You believe you took one. Simple questions like that. It's either yes or no. I think it's a good place to break and have lunch and come back. What time do you want to resume? Well, I'm going to take a little intermission. And what are y'all thoughts on all this? So far. All right. Sorry about that. I'm getting messages from people. Yep. Well, when isn't Colborn lying? I mean, his initial statement was that he never watched Making a Murder, and now he claims he's only watched a handful of episodes. And prior to this one, him stating that he never watched Making a Murder, how does he claim that the audio from the documentary causes him distress? It's getting quite interesting. Well, this is 439 pages. The first 20 something are the lawsuit that Stephen Avery brought up against Manitowoc Sheriff's Department and Vogel and Kosurik. Jesus Christ. Alright, I'm just going to ignore these for now so I can get through this. Because this is going on for another 3 hours in time, but alright. Mr. Colborn, have some wrap-up questions for items we were discussing before lunch break. And the first one would be, would you agree with that the integrity had been questioned and the reputation harmed at the time of trial? Yes. And you can't, as you sit here today, quantify the reputational harm arising from the trial and contemporaneous media coverage and came along with the trial, can you? Mr. Burnett, objection. I can say after the verdict, my reputation and everything went back to how it was. How do you know that? Because after the conviction, the negative press stopped. People began being more favorable about the events of the trial, the unfolding of the trial, the conviction. It was just a general atmosphere that was more supportive. So the publicly disappeared, publicity disappeared, but the articles that were written remained out there, correct? They were written during the trial, yes. Do you know what their archive those? But I don't recall blitzkrieg of negative press like. Well, that's not my question. You agreed with Attorney Strang that he ruined your credibility. Do you mean I agree with Brenda? Do you agree with Brenda? I don't see where I agreed, but I'm not the same page. I'm on the same page with her. I don't agree with her, but I'm on the same page with her. I can't believe this. The way he's answering these questions. Like he answered the question one way and then contradicts what he just said. As you see here today, do you agree with Attorney Strang ruling the credibility and integrity by making a murder? I agree that Attorney Strang played a part in either the release of the making a murder. Yes. Are you able to distinguish the reputational harm Attorney Strang caused you versus the reputational harm Jerome Buting caused you, versus that the making a murder caused you, versus that John Ferrer caused you, other than that Kathleen Zellner caused you? No, I can't, because making a murder gave them all their material. Well, making a murder took material from that trial, correct? Kathleen Zellner wasn't part of that trial. Making a murder took their material from the trial, correct? So you're changing your story. Mr. Burnett, objection. I'm saying I based a lot of this information off social media, threats that were being made to me, and I didn't have the trial transcript in front of me. Like, at one time, this man says that he only read transcripts, and now he's saying that he's watched only 7 episodes. Alright, 2 lines down from you say, the defense continues part of the through Netflix to maintain and keep alive these lies to this day. Just last week, Strang was on WTMJ radio saying these things I just mentioned. The trial was over 10 years ago. How much longer can the defense attorneys continue this crusade against my agency and personally? Did read that correctly? Yes, and if it's reading this, you believe that the defense team lied about during the trial, correct? That's where their crusade against began, correct? Now, I've always had the assumption that Mr. Schuer is part of this convicting documentary. I guarantee they're going to push this off to producing that documentary and making it public until after this plays out. Because whether he wins or loses, it's going to have big implications to what happens with that documentary. And who knows? Shit don't make sense. Something stank. But unless Mr. Griesbach was in the room with you and is sitting here today, were you in the room with you? None of us can know with 100% certainty, correct? I think that I drove that point home in trial, and based on the subsequent conviction, I believe the jury was convinced of it. We would have to trust you, correct, Mr. Colborn? Yes, you would have to trust that I was telling the truth under oath, and the jury found for the prosecution and convicted Mr. Avery, correct? Yes, they did. And the jury findings were included in making a murder, correct? Mr. Burnett, objection. Do you know, I have not watched a clip of any of the making a murder when a jury verdict is read, or so I can't answer you positively. I don't know what was included. I don't know what episode it was in. You have no reason to dispute that it was included, correct? I'm not alleging that, okay? You have no reason to believe that anyone from Netflix attended any portion of the proceeding against Mr. Avery, correct? I don't know that. I'm asking you only based on your personal knowledge. You don't have any reason, no, to believe that. No, I don't. So I'll take you back to Exhibit 1 that you signed this morning, and if you could flip to Exhibit A, which is stipulations proposed. 1 second, I've got to find that, okay? Flip to Exhibit A, which is an initial stipulation proposed, okay? I want to point to you the first 6, you declined to admit these, and a question for you as you sit here today in our personal capacity. Sorry, ambulance. Knowing you rely on lawyers to process all evidence, but personally, let me ask you about number 1. Are you personally aware of the evidence that Netflix employee attended a portion of the proceeding? I personally do not know, correct. Number 2, do you have any personal knowledge or any personal aware of evidence that Netflix employee has ever been in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin? During 2016 and 2017, we had an abundance of protesters in front of the courthouse for Stephen Avery's rally, which happens every year, with people screaming how corrupt we were and how they should be freed. And I thought Netflix was involved in that. assumptions, but I don't have any personal knowledge of evidence. Like, no one ever brought someone to me and said, this person works for Netflix. Are you personally aware of evidence that a Netflix employee ever spoke to anyone who appears in Making a Murder? I personally have no knowledge. I don't know if they did or did not. Are you personally aware of evidence that a Netflix employee ever received or read a transcript from proceeding Mr. Avery or involving Mr. Avery? Number 4, I believe I did not see documents that said Netflix employees had few transcripts of the criminal trial of Mr. Avery. Do you remember anything about those documents? No, I don't. So, would you just ask on the record that to the extent those documents exist can be identified, the plaintiff produced them to us? Number 5 here, are you personally aware of evidence that Netflix employees ever received or watched any raw footage of the proceeding involving Mr. Avery? I believe my attorneys do have evidence that Netflix employees did view both civil and criminal, civil and criminal video of me testifying both in deposition and in his criminal trial for the murder of Teresa Halbach. Okay? Do you understand that to be raw footage or footage that was produced by the filmmakers then provided to Netflix? You don't know. I don't know. Number 6, are you personally aware of any evidence that a Netflix employee ever received or watched any other raw footage used by filmmakers in creating Making a Murder? I personally don't know what they said or used or watched. No. So going back to Exhibit 2, the Second Amendment complaint referring to your paragraph 46, okay? Actually, it will be on the page 16, the last. Okay. Question. Of the bullet points, you said that among the things admitted for Making a Murder, in the last bullet here, was that Avery had a history of extreme violence and sexual aggression against women, including beating, strangulation, death threats, attempted abduction at gunpoint, and allegation of rape. Did I read that correctly? Yes. All right. So let's take each of those in the bullet one at a time. Do you know if there was evidence presented at trial that Avery beat a woman? I don't know because I wasn't allowed to attend the trial other than the day testified, so I don't know. So if I told you the judge excluded that evidence, you would have no reason to dispute. Correct. And if the Making a Murder didn't include that evidence, that consists with the happening at trial as far as you know, correct? Objection. Could you repeat? Sorry. Yeah. If these things were included at trial, and Making a Murder didn't include them, then Making a Murder was consistent with what happened at trial, correct? Objection. I'm not going to agree to that. I believe that the Making a Murder was consistent with what happened at trial. Well, you can. I think we can agree that if we can want to know what evidence was excluded, we can look at the Exhibit 57, correct? That's the judge's order. Yes, okay, so we talked about the exclusion from the trial and Stanley Morris incident. I actually want to play a clip from from Making a Murder. This will be from episode 1, which will be marked entirely of Exhibit 58, and then clip we're about to play will mark Exhibit 58A. Had you ever seen that clip from Making a Murder? Okay, so if you look back at Exhibit 57, I can point you now directly to page 10, onto page 11, where the court excluded acts that actually endangered the safety of Stanley Morris. While you're looking for that, I'll just ask you, isn't it true, Mr. Colborn, that even though the judge did not permit the jury to hear the evidence, Making a Murder included it? Objection. A portion of the interview with Detective Conrad, a very small portion of the testimony included in the clip, show me yes. And so in that sense at least, Making a Murder painted at least a flattering picture that Stephen Avery and jury is permitted to hear, correct? Mr. Burnett, objection. It would have appeared to me, based on the reaction by people around the globe. Well, I'm going to move to strike and ask you that you answer my question, that this is a very unflattering thing to publicize about Stephen Avery. Not even the jury got to hear it because it was prejudicial according to the judge, but the filmmakers put it in a documentary, correct? Yes, it's in the clip you just showed me. You also complained that the United Second Amendment complaint of Making a Murder portrayed an incident involving animal abuse in an accident and at worst childhood prank. Do you remember that allegation? Yes. Okay, but you acknowledge that the story about the animal abuse was omitted from Avery's trial, correct? I don't know if it came up in his trial or not. Okay, let me point to Exhibit 57 again, especially page 7. There's a subheaded 1982 act in criminal cruelty involving the killing of a cat. Do you see that? What pages are we on? 7, page 7. And if you read the end of the section 3 of the court order, the last sentence is that offered evidence fails at all 3 parts of the civilian test is not admissible. Do you see that? What pages are mentioned in the civilian test? On page 10 at the top. Okay. They're talking about the animal cruelty there because it's shifted to something else by then. So the animal cruelty section begins on page 7 and goes from page 8, 9, and concludes on page 10. All right. I see the area you're talking about. The animal cruelty evidence excluded from trial, correct? It looks like it. Do you know that Making a Murder included the story of showed it viewers? Burnett, objection. No, I didn't. Okay, let's play that clip. Exhibit 58B, identification, video playing. Had you ever seen the clip before? I have not. So based on the clip that one of the Sandy Moores, you would agree with the viewers of Making a Murder got a more complete picture of Mr. Avery's criminal history than the jurors did, correct? Objection. I would agree that the watered-down version of his acts were portrayed in Making a Murder while they weren't allowed in court. Wow. At least the viewers of the documentary heard about the attacking woman burning the cat, correct? They really didn't get to hear about that, did they? No? Yes. Okay, and you're not basing your conclusion on an opinion that Making a Murder concludes that anything other than the hateful calls they got from another anonymous callers is correct? Hundreds, if not thousands, okay? Yes, that's correct, okay. So you turned over 89 different voicemails to us. Does that sound about right? Yes, okay. I don't know. I'll represent you. Listen to each one. There was 89. Okay. There are thousands more that I haven't turned over. No, I've turned over everything that I have. That you had? Or everything that you have? Okay. Some didn't go to the recording. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your answer. I'm going to have to ask you again. Other than the crank calls and hateful messages from dozens of anonymous people, you're not basing your... Clearly, Avery is relatives and friends of attorneys, and Dean Strang and Jerome Beauty, investigator, aren't going to give anything but biased answers. Okay, well, this sort of brings me to the most of what I wanted to talk about here, which is as a look-through of all the responses your counsel drafted to our interrogatories, what they seem to be pointing to is a bias or maybe evidence that they think demonstrates an agenda by Netflix. They've pointed to an instance where Netflix, perhaps skeptical of evidence that Avery presented at trial. You pointed yourself to some of that, where someone at Netflix thought that something Avery presented at trial was sort of weak. Do you remember pointing that out to me? Yes. And they thought that the Avery's evidence, correct? In other words, it was Avery's evidence and it wasn't something that made up of a whole cloth. Yes, so I want to just ask you about the notion of documentary filmmaking and its bias. But before we get there, I want to ask you, do you have any evidence that Netflix instructed the producer defendants to make? Okay, and you don't think their perspective, their pro-law enforcement worldview, keeps them from making a fair, objective documentary, I take it? No, I don't. You're very pro-law enforcement, yes. Pro-military, yes. Conservative, yes. And you have a bias that you are 100% convinced that Avery is guilty, correct? Objection. I don't have a bias that way. He was convicted by a jury of his peers. Well, he was, so I believe in the verdict, yes. Okay, he was also convicted of rape, correct? Yes, and the jury verdict was flat out wrong, correct? Correct. So juries can get it wrong, correct? I believe, I don't know where, I'm looking at this for the first time, so I don't know where this is going after this. State of Wisconsin, I, Paula, Sierra Notary Republic of the State of Wisconsin, do hereby certify the party being examined, the deponed name in the foregoing deposition, Andrew Colborn, was by me duly sworn to testify the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The said deposition was taken before me at the time, dated, the place set forth, and I hereby certify foregoing full, true, the correct corner with the sword hand. Notes is taken and therefore reduced to the computerized transcript under direction and supervision. I further certify that I am neither counsel nor related to any party of the said action nor interested in the outcome, therefore, and that I have no contract with the parties, attorneys, or which an interest in action and affects the substantial tendency of the effect impartially and requires me to provide any service not made available to all parties in his action. and witness I have here. So this is day 2. I'm going to take a break, and because I got to answer some of these questions I got from some people, and somebody just showed me something that's quite interesting. So I'll be back with part 2 of the deposition, day 2. So see y'all next time.